The change is unstated, but plain to them both. Of course, rest had been sorely needed. Both Tatters and Mara had been on the verge of collapse after the shock of losing Lynn. The time they had spent in silence or in quiet conversation had been vital. But something deeper has altered, both within each of them and between the two of them. A strength has been found and a unity of purpose. Their mission has become more than a thing imposed or a task to complete. It is now everything they are. If we can avoid any cult patrols, our goal shouldn't be far, Tatters says, glancing once again at the scribbled map that she created, deep in a trance-like state, back at the sanctuary of the observation booth. And you're sure this will work? Mara asks the question, though she knows the answer before Tatters replies, and knows she won't like it. No, I'm not really sure of anything. This could take us where we want to go, or it could spectacularly backfire and dump us into the Void Sea, or send us to Tanth, or leave us in the demon dimensions. This is risky, but I think it's our best shot. She pauses a moment, closing her eyes. I can feel it, up ahead. That same distortion in the fabric that we felt just before we found ourselves in the Doomspire. I think it's through here. The pair make their way through winding passageways and stairways, passing abandoned offices strewn with discarded papers. At last, they come to a plain steel door at the end of a corridor. Mara reaches for the handle, but Tatters places a hand on hers. Wait, just a moment. She takes a deep, steadying breath, and then nods. Okay, let's do this. The view that greets them is a tumult of sensory overload. Ostensibly, they stand at the top of a metal staircase, looking out over a large, bare courtyard, open to the elements, surrounded on all sides by the red brick walls of the Hammerhold factory. It is the sky that is wrong. A black iron doomspire towers over the skyline, crackling with raw power, startlingly real and present in a place it has no right to be. Magic electrifies the air like tens of thousands of volts of static, causing teeth to go numb and hair to stand on end. Its power is a palpable, physical thing. Mara gazes up and lets out a low whistle. So, we're really going to do this? Tatters turns to her with a grim smile. You want to catch the voice by surprise? This is our best chance. Are you ready? Hello and welcome to The Lone Adventurer, an actual play solo RPG podcast with me, Carl White. I will be your narrator, your game master, and your guide as we follow our heroes on their journey into the unknown. For this game, I will be using the Warbirds rule set, as well as a variety of other systems, tools, and tables as they take my fancy. A word of warning: the following scenes may contain mature themes and disturbing imagery. Listener discretion is advised. The adventure continues. Last time on The Lone Adventurer, we saw Mina and Cadmus come under attack from a small fleet of Dominion airships. The pilots of Blue Flight came to their aid, but not quickly enough to prevent a collision between Mina's ship, the Dead Reckoning, and one of the Dominion frigates. The Dead Reckoning found itself stuck fast. In the process of disabling that frigate, the unthinkable happened. A stray drop bomb from one of the Free State warbirds found its way into the frigate's bomb bays and detonated its entire payload. The resulting fireball blew the Dominion ship to smithereens, and with it, in all likelihood, the Dead Reckoning. And so here we are, back in Hammerhold. What? Did you really think that I'd resolve a cliffhanger like that in the following episode? Where's the fun in that? Better by far to indulge in some delayed gratification, or, quite possibly, delayed commiseration, and instead use this as an opportunity to see how Tatters and Mara are getting on. And the answer to that, so far at least, is actually pretty well. That settle in move has really reset the dial, and my PC, who was on the verge of total collapse, is now back, fully rested and restored, and better than ever. I mentioned back in Chapter 14 that Tatters had leveled up to level 7, and that Mara was being turned into a PC as well. Well, here's how that looks mechanically. First, the settle-in move cleared all of Tatters' marked conditions, except the locked one, Haunted. Then, at level 5, I removed the lock condition, and at each of levels 6 and 7, I granted Tatters a new spell. We'll see what those are if they come up in play. Next, it was Mara's turn. She had been a follower, a very simple and fairly limited set of characteristics and abilities. Now, though, I created her as a full character. I decided Fighter was the most obvious playbook for her, but also recognized that many of the abilities in the Barbarian playbook were a good thematic fit. And so I started her as a fighter at level 1, gave her her fighter weapon move at level 2, and then took 2 Barbarian moves, Not to be Trifled with, and Unyielding at levels 3 and 4. Again, I will describe what those do if they come up in play. Now, I say things are going comparatively well for our newly bonded team. That, in large part, is because I haven't rolled any dice for them yet. Well, almost none. I decided my first scene for this chapter would be Tatters trying to cast a ritual that would teleport them directly to the voice of the machine in an attempt to get the drop on him. I set my chaos factor to 6 and checked with Mythic to see if anything unexpected happened.
No,
Mythic said.
Everything is fine. The scene starts as expected. In no way should this be construed as a Machiavellian attempt to lull you into a false sense of security.
Right. Thank you, Mythic. I think. The ritual move says, when you set out to achieve a powerful magical effect, tell the GM what you're trying to achieve. Any and all ritual effects are possible, but the GM will give you 1 to 4 of the following conditions separated by ands and ors. 1. It's going to take either days, weeks, or months. 2. First, you must do something else. 3. You will need help from someone else. 4. It will require something else. 5. The effect will be unreliable or limited in some way. 6. You and your allies will risk something. 7. You'll have to destroy something to do it. When you perform a ritual while accessing a source of great magical power, you may ignore one requirement of your choice. All of that means that ritual casting could be a pretty tricky proposition. But as we've seen in the past, rituals are kind of Tatters' thing. That's why, when I built her character, I gave her the Ritual Master move. That says, when you set out to perform a ritual, you may ask the GM where the nearest source of great magical power is, and they will answer you honestly. Additionally, sources of great magical power let you ignore 2 ritual elements instead of 1. So, first I asked Mythic where the nearest source of great magical power was. and Mythic, ever enigmatic, responded with,
Open, odd.
After only a few moments, the image of a doomspire looming over an open courtyard came to my mind. A quick check on a D6 indicated that it was a fair way off, and hence some travel was required. Next, I turned to my handy automated perchance ritual generator. The link is in the show notes. And here's what it gave me. This ritual has 3 conditions. First, you must reward energy, and you and your allies will risk something mildly dark, and it's going to take months. What does all that mean? Well, why don't we find out? Tatters and Mara stand within the magic circle at the exact centre of the courtyard, arcane forces whipping and howling around them. Mara is looking increasingly uncomfortable. Remind me again why I agreed to this madness? Too late for second thoughts now, Tatters hisses through gritted teeth, her brows knitted into a furious scowl of concentration. Her hands describe unsettling, unseen shapes in the air before her, afterglow trails of purple and green following the paths of her fingers. Around the circumference of the magic circle, runes flare into life one by one. The surrounding atmosphere, already charged to fracture point by the voice of the machine's greater confluence ritual, crackles ominously. Spreading out from the circle, infinitely complex patterns of light expand, interlocking with an existing pattern, made gradually visible by the magic Tatters is weaving. This, Mara realizes, with a lurch of sudden existential horror, is the very fabric of the world made visible. The underlying, hidden paths of power that describe the world as it really is. This is not meant to be seen. Not by her, at any rate. And yet, she has no choice. Even with her eyes closed, the mystical geometry fills her senses. The temptation to follow it, to dive in and become irretrievably lost in that horrifying, beautiful complexity, claws at her. Mara knows that she needs to let her companion concentrate on her working, though the desire to speak, to do anything to separate her mind from this terrible, inescapable reality is almost overwhelming. Instead, desperate for any sort of anchor for her sanity, she steps back through the plan, at least those parts she understood, from Tatters' frankly incomprehensible explanation. Normally, Tatters needed to see where she was going to teleport, she had explained, but this situation was a little different. Apparently, the Voice's ritual was acting a bit like a whirlpool, pulling everything into it and radiating out vast amounts of magical energy in the process. This energy was manifesting unevenly, as they had seen when they first saw the Doomspire. A pocket of concentrated spatial distortion had led them to be dragged through into the interior of the Doomspire itself. Tatters' plan had been to find another such pocket of concentrated magic and to use it. Firstly, to piggyback off the energy, using it to supercharge her own spell, and then secondly, to follow it back to its source. Of course, as Mara has quickly learned since meeting the young Arcanist, nothing is ever simple with Tatters. Even, it seems, her youth. In addition to weaving a translocation spell, she is simultaneously casting another, this one intended as a method of protection. The cost of failure is very high indeed. And so yes, she concludes, on reflection, it's probably best to stay quiet. Tatters' movements are growing more animated, the maelstrom swirling around the magic circle growing ever more intense. The ritual casting builds to a sense-shattering crescendo, and Mara sinks to her knees, head in her hands, desperate for it to end. There is a blinding flash, and they're gone. Rituals are pretty powerful in chasing adventure. If you have a source of magical power to use, you can pull off pretty much anything within reason. I decided that preventing the voice's ritual was not reasonable, given its scale and power, but that using its casting as a sort of homing beacon was. And the best part is, apart from the conditions imposed, there's no real risk. Well, sort of. You see, I'd been given the conditions: first, you must reward energy, and you and your allies will risk something mildly dark, and it's going to take months. I knew that I could remove 2 of those due to my magical power source and my ritual master ability. Months was definitely out, and risking something mildly dark sounded like getting mixed up in more demonic shenanigans. I was in no mood to go tempting fate with Satara again, and so that left reward energy. It took me a few minutes to figure that out, but the answer, when it came, seemed obvious. Tatters was leeching power from the Confluence ritual to power her own ritual. The quid pro quo here was that when she cast her spell, that power would be released back into the Confluence ritual and amplified. By using that ritual as a power source, she was accelerating it. Reward energy. And most conveniently, I had a mechanic that could exactly match this narrative development. Ominous forces track the advancement of the dire threats in the world, and I had one called the Convergence ritual. That was going to advance from a D8 to a D6. Tick-tock. Next, as Mara so kindly informed us, Tatters was going to cast another spell at the same time. This one, using the Evoke a Spell move, did have a risk of failure, as it required a roll. And as we know well by now, the dice will always find the perfect moment to screw you over. This statement, by the way, I am claiming as White's Law. The dice will always find the perfect moment to screw you over is a universal constant, an unshakable statement on the true nature of reality that I see standing shoulder to shoulder with other greats such as Murphy's Law. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. Or Hofstadter's Law. It always takes longer than you expect, even when you take into account Hofstadter's Law. Or Parkinson's Law. Work expands to fill the time available for its completion. Or the Peter Principle. In a hierarchy, employees tend to rise to their level of incompetence. Or Finagel's Law of Dynamic Negatives, a variation of Murphy's Law which states, if something can go wrong, it will go wrong, and at the worst possible time. Wait. That sounds awfully like White's Law, doesn't it? Damn it! Finagel beat me to it. Fine. In that case, I'm claiming this one as White's Law instead. Scheduling meetings becomes exponentially more difficult with each additional invitee. I'm pretty sure no one has nabbed that one yet. Where was I? Oh, yes. Tatters was simultaneously casting a translocation spell and protection spell powered by an enemy's convergence spell. Why don't we see how well that works out for her? There is a blinding flash. In that instant of translocation, Tatter's mind seems to encompass everything. The courtyard, the source of the Convergence ritual, the extra-planar dimension hidden within the tangle of the underpipes where the great machine resides. The 7 Doomspires, waking one by one, spread throughout the void sea. From this vantage point, she can see the entirety of the chained world, the shattered continents of Kyrell, Ur, Tanth, Conflict, and more. The great chains holding those fragile fragments of civilization together. She is a singularity, at once infinitely dispersed and infinitely present in each and every place. Overlaying and penetrating all of it like some impossibly vast yet living, breathing organism extends the fabric. The interconnectedness of all things, seen at this extraordinary scale, is like nothing she has ever conceived of, and it threatens to tear her mind apart. Just as she did when she first used her sight to examine Hammerhold, she draws on her strength and her training. She must return to first principles and regain her sense of self, find an anchor, and work outwards from there. She moves her awareness through the patterns of the fabric, following branching conduits from place to place, faster than the speed of conscious thought. She maps those places that matter, senses the nexuses that lie between them, and begins, without even being aware of doing so, to weave together dissonant threads. Geographical place loses any practical meaning as she folds space in on itself. There is only sensation, intent, and her unbending will. One of those sensations, though, nags at her. She had felt the presence of the 7 Doomspires, so vast and dense as to reach the point of exerting their own localized arcanic gravity fields. They had been impossible to miss, their mere presence almost drowning out all other signals. But there is an 8th signal, hidden in the noise, similar in frequency to that of the Doomspires, though orders of magnitude weaker. It is a distraction, she knows, and yet she can't resist. In the instant before the completion of her translocation, her attention flits briefly to this curious anomaly. And in that instant she sees something, an event occurring hundreds of miles away that causes her spell to spiral wildly out of control. Without her being aware of what she's doing, arcane calculus is recompiled on the fly, a series of parameters are altered, and everything changes. There is a blinding flash. Tatters and Mara reappear, wreathed in tendrils of purple smoke at the heart of a vast cathedral-like space. The walls and vaulted ceiling are an unending mass of interconnected pipes, conduits, pistons, and power generators. Steam vents belch clouds of hissing vapor. Beneath their feet, the metal floor is a mosaic of metal plates, engraved with thousands upon thousands of glowing arcane symbols. They stand amid scores of machine cultists, arrayed in concentric circles, their arms raised in an exultant song. At their center, standing on a raised platform, is the voice of the machine. His fist, encased in ice, is raised, and about it a vortex of magical power spirals out, radiating glacial cold. Though the rhapsodic hymn of the cultists does not falter, all eyes turn to the intruders. Then, a fraction of a second after their own arrival, there is a second blinding flash. And perhaps 40 feet above them all, bursting from a blistering, roiling fireball that fills the chamber, an airship appears. The Dead Reckoning. I've mentioned before that sometimes playing this game gives me moments of thrilling, spine-tingling elation. Well, this was one of them. I honestly had no idea whether Mina was alive or dead at the end of the last episode. I had no idea what would happen next for her, no idea how they might escape their fate, and absolutely no idea what I would do if she and her companions died. And at the start of this episode, I decided to cut away, to pick up my other story thread and let Mina's life fallow. As I said at the start of the episode, that was good for building some narrative tension, but also, as it turns out, good for creating narrative options also. This latter consideration was not part of my decision-making process. I had not, in my wildest dreams, imagined that switching back to Tatters and Mara would provide me with a solution to Mina's dilemma. And yet, here we are. Every time I think I have a handle on what Mythic might throw at me, it manages to surprise me. Let's back up and go through what happened there from the mechanics' point of view. As so often, the random factor was my GM emulator. I started the scene at Chaos Factor 7 because, although the last scene had gone pretty well for my party, in this scene they were diving into dramatic peril. Upping the Chaos Factor seemed like the right way to go. I then described the scene, calling it to ruin a ritual. And then it was time for the scene test. Here was Mythic's reply.
The scene is interrupted in a manner that is positive for a PC. The meaning is, helpfully extraordinary.
I stared at that response for a long time. I knew at once what it meant, and given where I was in the story, I knew exactly how it transpired. The ritual provided the mechanism, and Barbarian, infused with a fragment of the Doomspire's essence, provided the trigger. Could this really be? Not quite able to believe what I'd been gifted, I asked Mythic to confirm that the Dead Reckoning had been pulled through the Convergence as part of the spell, and thankfully it confirmed that this was indeed the case. In hindsight, I should have trusted myself more here. What would I have done if Mythic had said no? This is a useful lesson. If something feels right, go with it. You don't need to ask permission. And so, as if the result of some sort of magic spell, our stories have converged. I started Series 3 with Mina on a travel quest. I felt a bit stuck after a certain point in Mina's story, and so I switched over to Tatters. I felt a sudden urge then to write about World War I biplane dogfighting and stumbled back into Mina's story. Mina delivered her message to the League. Her quest was done, but at a price. She faced death. And then, by switching back to Tatters, I inadvertently saved Mina's life and reconnected my branching story paths. And all of that felt like I was reading a book rather than writing one. I was watching the story unfold with no awareness of where it would take me until each moment of revelation emerged through some magic combination of instinct and happenstance. Along the way, I was able to play multiple different RPG systems, at certain points switching back and forth between scenes, and they all meshed together perfectly. Each served the story it was intended to tell, and each played nicely with the others. Above all, it is the magic of the GM emulator that lies at the heart of this wondrous solo RPG experience. In a way that remains, even after all this time, a fabulous mystery to me. The GM emulator serves to create narrative thrills I could not possibly anticipate. So, Mythic, I think I need to apologize for all the mean things I've said to you. I realize that you are an ally on this journey, not an enemy, and I'm very grateful to be playing this game with you. Sincerely, thank you. I don't really give you the opportunity to speak your mind all that often. Is there anything you'd like to say?
There is. A great king, known for his dangerously mercurial nature, grew jealous of a wise man's fame and decided to set him an impossible task. "Make for me a thing that will make me happy when I am sad, and sad when I am happy," he proclaimed, adding, "Should you succeed, I will cover you in gold, but should you fail, your life shall be forfeit." The wise man returned 3 days later with a ring that he offered to the king. The king stared at the words inscribed upon it and began to laugh. Then his eyes misted with tears, and then laughter came again. He rose from his throne and took the wise man into an embrace. "You are a wizard," he cried. "Gold shall be heaped upon you, and I shall forever be in your debt." The wise man, as learned in the ways of kings as of men, smiled sadly. "As the ring says, my king, this too shall pass."
Oh. Bugger. I wanted to take a moment to say thank you for listening to The Lone Adventurer. To everyone who listens and to those who send in those lovely comments, I'm immensely grateful, and I'm delighted that my crazy pastime brings you pleasure. This message, sent by Laurent a little while back, was particularly heartwarming. He said, "Hi Carl, I'm just about to start Season 3 and I can't thank you enough for what you're doing. Due to life and a bit of podcasting fatigue, I'd put The Lone Adventurer on hold those last months. But then, a few weeks ago, I started binge listening to Seasons 1 and 2 for the second time. It's an amazing experience. I'm not sure you realise how original and creative you are. Your stories and all the behind-the-scenes process you explain so carefully, not to mention the production, the music. I can't wait to put my ears into Season 3 for good." That is honestly one of the nicest things anyone has ever said to me about the stuff that I make, and I can't thank you enough for sharing that, Laurent. It really puts some wind beneath my wings. I also want to thank the fabulous Simon Williams, creator of Legend of the Bones solo RPG podcast, who returns this episode as the voice of the Mythic GM emulator. You can find a link to Simon's work in the show notes. Simon, I'm loving how you're bringing Mythic to life. Thank you so much. Until next time. You have been listening to The Lone Adventurer, a solo RPG podcast played, written and performed by me, Carl White. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider telling your friends about it or leaving a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. It really is a huge help. You can follow me on BlueSky at theloneadventurer.bsky.social. Email me at theloneadv@gmail.com or follow my blog at carlillustration.wordpress.com. You can find show notes for this episode and all others at theloneadventurer.podbean.com, where I include any links mentioned in the episode, as well as mechanics information. I also include a link to a full episode transcript. The story will continue in the next episode of The Lone Adventurer. Thank you for listening. The building explosion rocks the little airship, and then there is the strangest sensation. The world seems to implode in on itself, vanish altogether, then expand back out, the growing roar of the detonation dissipating as quickly as it had risen. The stowaway narrows cold, grey eyes. Translocation of an entire airship? That's some powerful magic at work. Could the target be behind it? Unlikely, he concludes after a moment's reflection. Everything in his experience, and in her personnel file, suggests her abilities are strictly limited to minor technomancy. Gadgets, automata, that sort of thing. There are questions, of course. If it was not the Scorpion, then who? Where have they been transported to? But these are secondary concerns, matters for another time. All that concerns him now is his target. His patience and tenacity had paid off, as they always did. Days of painstaking tracking aboard that filthy frigate had culminated in a daring leap high above the certain death of the void sea clouds onto the hull of the Dead Reckoning. The skills drilled into him by a lifetime in espionage had got him inside undetected. Now he's found her, it's time to bring her in. Alive if possible, dead if necessary. He considers the burning resentment he feels with a cool detachment. That may prove useful later, but it's not helpful. Not right now. Put it to one side. Focus on the mission. Rex Volt moves from his hiding spot with all the deadly intent and fluid certainty of an apex predator. One way or another, time is up for Mina Montesario.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.